It was a very interesting experience for myself, talking to different educators and having the opportunity to compare and contrast what they told me. As I got into the details of what they told me, I focused on understanding, interpreting, and analyzing their ways of teaching, including instructional strategies. Holly Robinson was the first teacher that I was able to interview. She's a recent graduate of the U of R, and she now teaches at a French immersion school in the north end of Regina. Lane Goering was another teacher I had the opportunity to interview, and he now teaches phys ed and health in Milford, Saskatchewan, my hometown. Perhaps the biggest difference between Holly and Lane was the fact that when I asked Holly what the words instructional strategy meant to her, she was able to list and recall many that she used and many that she had learned along the way. Lane, unfortunately, on the other hand, was unclear of the terminology, and I had to assist him throughout the interview, which led to maybe having some different responses, but overall gave a very different perspective on how he viewed the way he teaches. It should be said that Lane did use instructional strategies. However, he just wasn't aware of what they were while he was teaching. I do feel like this was a shortfall for Lane, in order to best reflect on the way we teach, we need to understand the pieces that make it up. Often, when he tried to describe instructional strategies, he used classroom management techniques instead. They go hand in hand, but they're not necessarily the same thing, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit here. Holly was able to masterfully explain the different instructional strategies that she used on a common day basis. For example, she used KWL charts, leading questions, lecturing as a direct form of teaching, and other strategies that she said were so often ingrained in the way she taught that she didn't even need to incorporate them purposefully into the lesson plan anymore. Rather, they just came out in the way she taught. One strategy that Holly described that she wished she used more was synectics. Synectics is using imaginative representation of real-world items. For example, she brought this up because in high school, she specifically remembers the parts of a cell because she made a diagram out of vegetables. She said that creating these representations she would love to use more, but often found it difficult to find opportunities to do so. But she was the living representation of how important it could be in a student's learning. Despite struggling in some ways to communicate the instructional strategies that he used on a day-to-day basis, as we went through the interview, I drew and identified several that he used. For example, he was a huge fan of being able to bring in an expert guest. Expert guests for him allowed him to step back and let someone with more knowledge and more authentic knowledge teach subjects and outcomes that he considered very important. For example, he said that just in the next weeks, he'll be bringing in someone to discuss tragic suicide and death because he understood the importance but did not feel like he could provide a quality teaching experience for a student's behalf. Other strategies that Lane used on a fairly frequent basis included things like repetition, where he would have students recall what prior learning was and being able to repeat it at the beginning and end of every class as a way of setting an anchor for the rest of the day. These moments of recall served as a starting or ending points for key concepts that he wanted students to understand, and he noticed that by recalling and repeating, he was able to increase students' learning. Immediately, by comparing the two teachers, I noticed that Lane relied on more direct forms of teaching, and Holly, on the other hand, gave students more freedom and choice by doing experiential-based activities and indirect teaching activities that best benefited the students as a whole. Personally, one thing that I really enjoyed from Holly's perspective was the fact that she understood her individual students and was able to begin to give adaptive instructional strategies that suited their needs. For example, she's able to recognize, and specifically she gave the example of in a health education classroom, of when she needs to use specific grouping in order to make sure that it's a success. In these groups, she would aim to put students who she knew would work well together, but often chose not to because of previous lines of friendship or other reasons. I also enjoyed Lane's use of expert guests. He brought in and described bringing in expert guests for a variety of different subjects. Where I would differ from his approach would be in the fact that he would aim to bring expert guests in the areas he felt uncomfortable in. Often, for example, this would be in death and suicide or different aspects of sexual health. I personally believe those are the subjects that I want to spend time developing and being able to teach to my students. I primarily think this because I want to invite the difficult conversations into my classroom. I want students to understand that it's a safe space to talk about the things that they might be worried about, whether that's relationships, whether that's about death or suicide, or whether that's about any conversation that will naturally come up. My space, I want to invite people to be safe in, and I don't want to have to rely on outside experts to create that feeling inside my own classroom. As I begin to become a more refined health educator, as I begin to think of what it'll be once I'm in the shoes of the teachers I interviewed, I have many things to think about. But the first and foremost is a basic understanding that I'm trying to hold myself to, and that's that health is a broad subject. Although there's outcomes and indicators that need to be covered, rather, I want to use what I refer to as tangential learning. So there's a tangent in a circle, and if you hit the point of where you want, there's going to be a natural occurrence where a student finds a point on the other side that's directly in line. Rather than shutting that learning down, I want to encourage people to begin to have those discussions about relating to their own experiencing and having a tangent off the point of discussion. I want students to begin to take responsibility in their own learning and creating the connections to their own lives, and my job as an educator will be giving them points for them to hit and bounce off to another goal. This can be best done by creating a culture of openness, honesty, safety, and curiosity. If we give the students those tools, those feelings of their learning, then they will begin to take whatever we are learning with outcomes and go beyond that. They'll be able to connect it to their own life, their own community, and their own families, and suddenly it's not just learning knowledge, it's about learning of the world around them, which I think health should be all about. The final aspect in this video that I would like to explore is my assessment in health education philosophy. Both of my people that I interviewed referenced the fact that assessment is difficult in health education. In comparison to math, there's often a right or wrong answer, but health, because it is a broad subject, is extremely reliant on different forms to communicate what the students know. For example, Holly said she struggled to fairly assess students when it came to written examples because many of her students who were doing an English subject in a French immersion school did not have the English language arts skills to be able to accurately communicate the skills that she expected. They could verbally communicate, but when it came to written assessment, she could not rely on what she was seeing in order to test their knowledge. Lane also referenced the fact that many students who he knew could understand and verbally come back to him with what they believed was the right answer had a hard time articulating that in a written format. Neither of them really had a fantastic solution of getting around. One potential solution for this would be simple. It's that we just need to give students more choice in the way that they demonstrate their knowledge. I think this assignment that I'm doing as of right now is a fantastic example of that. I'm able to do the format that best suits my needs and best suits the way I think I will be able to dictate my knowledge. Students need to begin to understand what works for them. And by giving them choice in the way we assess, by helping them develop the criteria of which they're assessed with, by making them think about how can I present this knowledge in a way, this content in a way that makes sense to the people around them best, they begin to be aware of their own learning, they begin to be aware of how they can improve their learning, and they begin to take responsibility in that learning. I personally need to understand that my assessment should not stay stagnant otherwise. There will always be new concepts that I should be trying out so that I can be challenging my own philosophy of assessment as well as adapting it to best meet the needs of my students. The one thing that reminded me while I was doing this assignment, when I was doing the interviews, was the fact that maybe the best way I can stay on top of my own renewal of my assessment and health ed philosophy is to simply be talking to other educators. I learned so much in my brief conversations with Holly and Lane, and it reminded me that there's a wealth of knowledge in each and every educator that I meet, and I should be picking their brain about what concepts they use, how do they deliver this information, and what works for them and what doesn't. That, by continually having that conversation with different health educators, might be the best way that I can improve my teaching on a regular basis. Connection will help me create my way forward in my first few years of my career. And it's really important for me to understand that the people that I reached out to will be my mentors, as well as people that I will be able to share information with throughout my career. Education needs to be collaborative. And I was really grateful to have this reinforced by this assignment. And I hope that this assignment, this video that I'm creating now, is something that I'll be able to look back to as a touchstone for my future learning and see how my health education philosophy has changed over the years.